Welcome to Aging Insight with your host, John Ross and Lisa Scholmeyer. This program is made possible by
Welcome to Aging Insight. I'm Lisa Scholmeyer, and I'm here with my co-host, John Ross, and we're bringing you the Aging Insight program into your living rooms so that you can get information and answers to questions that really allow you to live on your own terms, to live independently, and to not be a burden on other people and not go broke as you go into your retirement and into our aging and our golden years. And that's really what Aging Insight is all about. We want to be here to educate you and families that are caring for a senior or a disabled person.
Yeah, well, and when we're talking about dealing with elder law, a lot of times people think of that, well, the name is kind of obvious if we're talking about older people, right?
Yeah,
but sometimes even younger people have the same issues, those who are born with disabilities or become disabled due to illness or injury. A child with Down syndrome, for example, has some very similar care needs and care expenses and situational problems that, say, an 80-year-old with Alzheimer's has. So they can be very similar situations. And so, just because we talk about elder law doesn't necessarily mean that we're talking about an older person.
Right. So, that kind of brings us to our topic today. And, one of the things that we like to do is we like to give tools to our community members so that they can better address their situations. And one of the tools I want to talk about today assist families that are preparing to care for a member of their family that has disabilities. That's always a huge concern for a family that when a child has disabilities, about how the future of that child is going to play out, how that child will support themselves, how that child will acquire the services and the housing and the medical supports that child needs. And in 2014, Congress got into the act to assist families as they prepare for their disabled child's future. And Congress passed an act called the ABLE Act, which is, I believe, a better life experience. That's what it stands for.
Achieving a better life experience.
So ABLE. Government has always got to come up with a neat little acronym.
Yeah, no, that's right. Well, let's give you a little background behind why this act is important. So, oftentimes somebody with disabilities, especially if they're younger who have disabilities, they never have the opportunity to contribute to things like Social Security, pension plans, things like that. And so oftentimes they rely on need-based government benefits, particularly things like SSI and Medicaid, to provide for their basic care, a little bit of monthly income and their health insurance. And these programs have very strict asset limits. For example, with SSI, a person is limited to essentially a home, a car, and $2,000 in total savings. Well, just because you are disabled and just because you are young and maybe you can't maintain traditional employment, but there's lots of disabled people that are able to do a little bit of work here and there. Maybe it's just cleaning some tables at a restaurant or whatever it is, but they're able to do a little bit and maybe save a little bit of extra money. Or maybe people want to give them gifts, or other ways that disabled person has acquired a little bit of assets, and maybe they want to hold on to those assets for their future needs. Well, the problem is if we have this disabled person who, in order to keep their benefits, has to have less than $2,000, how do they set aside a portion of their own savings in order to prepare for their future? Or how does maybe a family member or somebody set aside money to help them provide for their future? So that's the problem we're dealing with, and this is what the ABLE Act was intended to solve.
Right, because as Americans, we think of ourselves as a self-sufficient population, and we certainly want to encourage that in everyone, and disabled persons being no different. So the idea that a disabled person, through whatever activities that they can do, can save a little money for their own future needs, it's a feel-good thing to do, it's the right thing to do, and we want to provide a tool to allow them to do that. And before the ABLE Act of 2014, there really was no tool for a disabled person to save these little amounts. There were some estate planning type tools and some trust and things, but there weren't anything quite as simple as
Right.
the ABLE Act, which essentially creates an ability for a disabled person to have a savings account.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's...
Yeah, there were already something called 529 accounts, and 529 accounts were tax deferred accounts that people could set up for college-related expenses. So if I wanted to put some money back for my kid, I could open up a 529 account and put some money aside for my child, which would then grow tax-free. And then when my child got to college age, they could take that money out of the account, and as long as they used it for college-related expenses, the child wouldn't have to pay any taxes on that. What the ABLE Act does is set up almost a very similar type of account, but instead of talking about a minor child, we're talking about any person who is disabled and was disabled prior to the age of 26. So a person who had a disability prior to the age of 26 could now set up one of these accounts, contribute money to that savings account, which grows in a tax-deferred way, just like the 529 account. And as long as they pull the money out for disability-related expenses,
Right.
there won't be any taxes on this. And most importantly, the value of that account does not count towards any of their need-based government benefits.
So yes, that's certainly a broad overview of the ABLE Act accounts that are now permitted for disabled persons, and we're going to talk about some of the specific details and limitations of the ABLE Act accounts when we come back from our break. So stick with us.
Hi there, I'm Larry Sims. It's been my privilege for the past several years to be a volunteer board member of Hospice of Texarkana, and there I'm able to represent community members like you. We continually customize our end-of-life care to better meet the needs of our community. As an example, our medical director and nurse practitioner still make visits to homes and facilities. Call today to learn more about the help we can give your family. Hospice of Texarkana, the nonprofit hospice established in 1985 for the community, by the community.
As things get older, they require more care. This car and I have seen a lot of miles together, but because I take care of her, she runs just like she did in 1955. That's why I chose the Wadley Senior Clinic, with an individualized care plan designed just for me and a convenient location off Jefferson Avenue. They have everything to keep me running like new. It's not about the miles, it's about the journey. Let the Wadley Senior Clinic keep you happy, healthy, and cruising down the road of life.
Welcome back to Aging Insight, everybody. I'm your host, John Ross, here with Lisa Schulmeyer, and today we're talking about ABLE accounts. And ABLE accounts are named for the ABLE Act, which is a brand new piece of legislation. It was passed right at the end of 2014 and goes into effect here at the beginning of 2015. So now we have a law that allows people who are on need-based benefits like SSI and Medicaid to set aside a little money for themselves without having to worry about losing their government benefits if they go over the income limits. So this can be a huge deal for that disabled person if they want to plan for their future.
Right. So John, a lot of times if you have a disability, one of the biggest issues has always been being able to acquire and maintain some health insurance coverage. And so a person with disabilities, once they're found disabled, then they can qualify for Medicare benefits regardless of their age once they have been determined to have been disabled and on disability for 2 years. The issue here, though, is if a person such as a higher functioning person with mental retardation, or maybe a person with some wheelchair bound, some things like that, if they were able to go out and earn some income, and by saving some of their own income, they ended up going over their asset limit of $2,000, well, then they automatically lost their health insurance. And we all know these days that healthcare costs are such a huge burden and concern for persons who are older and persons with disabilities, that the losing of this insurance and the medical coverage was so critical that really it discouraged disabled persons from working or saving any money at all. So the ABLE accounts are a solution to that, because we do want people to save for their own future expenses. So that's one of the big advantages.
Yeah, so there are some pretty good advantages as far as this is really one of the first times a person has been able to themselves set up an account. That disabled person being able to set up their own account by themselves and set aside some money. So this is really kind of a game changer in this situation.
So one of the questions, John, is, how much money can you save in an ABLE account?
Right. So there are going to be some limits here. You can actually save an unlimited amount, but if you cross the $100,000 line.
Okay, $100,000.
So right, if you get in excess of $100,000, then anything above that $100,000 is going to start counting towards your eligibility for things like SSI. It doesn't necessarily mean that you lose the SSI, but you may lose the monthly check that SSI provides.
Okay.
So where SSI maximum pays around $725 a month, if you save too much in that ABLE account, you might lose that $725. You'd still keep your health insurance, but you'd lose that extra income. So that's one limitation. And the other is going to be limitations as to how much can be put in on an annual basis by other people, like parents or aunts and uncles. And again, those are only going to be limited by state rules. So each state has certain rules related to 529 accounts that say how much can go into them each year. Those will vary as the regulations come out about some of this. And if gifts are made into these in excess of the gift tax exclusion amount,
Ooh.
yeah, which is basically around $14,000 per person per year, gift tax or gifts in excess of that amount could have some gift tax consequences as well. So there will be some limitations as far as what can go into them.
Well, and John, what I assume is going to happen with these ABLE accounts is that as disabled persons set these accounts up, I don't really foresee these accounts being a place that families are socking away tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
No.
I really anticipate these will be accounts to where maybe there's $8,000, $12,000, $15,000 that disabled person has been able to save for their own, or through those little gifts from family, birthdays,
Right.
things like that.
Yeah, enough to pay for some of these little things here and there. And of course, there's some reasons why you wouldn't necessarily want to create large amounts
Sure.
into these accounts, because while these accounts are good, there are some downsides to all of this. And one of the biggest ones, you might be saying to yourself, well, this all sounds fine and dandy, but why would the government let somebody accumulate these assets and still pay for them for all of these need-based benefits?
That's right. If we have a disabled person receiving government benefits on welfare, so to speak, why should we let them save a lot of money? One of the reasons that the government has changed the rules to do this is, number one, we do want people to save a bit for their own expenses, but number two, at the time the disabled person dies, any monies left in these ABLE accounts, where do they go, John?
They go to the State Department of Health and Human Services as a reimbursement for any money the state has spent on that person's care.
Yeah.
So, if the person is on SSI, well, SSI is paid through the Social Security Administration. That's not what we're talking about. But if that person is on SSI and also on Medicaid, which typically those things go hand in hand, then the cost of medical care, doctor's visits, surgeries, care providers, in-home care providers, nursing home costs, all of those sort of things, the state wants to get paid back for those.
Yes.
And you may, if you've watched the show before, you may be familiar with this concept because it's the same rule that applies for older people who are on Medicaid in a nursing home. When that person dies, the state wants to get paid back. And so when they made these laws, this ABLE Act, they said, we're going to let you save some money, but if there's any of that money left when you die, that's going to have to come back to the state to reimburse them.
Yeah, so it is something to consider, because there are other tools that if there is a large amount out there, maybe an inheritance or something like that, that there are some other tools that can set aside large amounts like that for the use of that disabled person, but does not get entangled with these payback laws.
That's right. So why don't we, before we get into that, because that can get a little complicated, why don't we take another break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about okay, this ABLE Act is all great and fine and dandy, but what are the alternatives, and when should you use one or the other? We'll talk about that when we come back, so stick around.
As things get older, they require more care. This car and I have seen a lot of miles together, but because I take care of her, she runs just like she did in 1955. That's why I chose the Wadley Senior Clinic, with an individualized care plan designed just for me and a convenient location off Jefferson Avenue. They have everything to keep me running like new. It's not about the miles, it's about the journey. Let the Wadley Senior Clinic keep you happy, healthy, and cruising down the road of life.
Hi there, I'm Larry Sims. It's been my privilege for the past several years to be a volunteer board member of Hospice of Texarkana. And there I'm able to represent community members like you. We continually customize our end-of-life care to better meet the needs of our community. As an example, our medical director and nurse practitioner still make visits to homes and facilities. Call today to learn more about the help we can give your family. Hospice of Texarkana, the nonprofit hospice established in 1985 for the community, by the community.
Welcome back to Aging Insight. I'm Lisa Scholmeyer, and I'm here with John Ross, and we are elder law attorneys based here in the Arklatex area. And today we're really talking more about issues that affect disabled persons and persons that have become disabled before the age of 26. So that may be a little bit different than some of our elder law issues, but Today we've been talking about the ABLE Act accounts, and the ABLE Act was passed by Congress in 2014. It was one of the few bright spots in our 2014 congressional year. But these are accounts where disabled persons can save for their own future expenses. And you know, John, one of the things about the ABLE Act accounts is that, you know, what kind of expenses are we talking about that these disabled people can save for? You know, you said earlier that you can spend the money out of the account and there's no tax consequences so long as the spending is on disability related expenses.
Right.
But that's a pretty broad brush.
Yeah, because it could be on education, for example, so expenses related to schooling or job training, those don't count. Expenses on tools or equipment related to the person's care, things that maybe the government doesn't pay for. So, you know, where Medicaid might provide a wheelchair but not a fancy electric one, you know, or, you know, Medicaid doesn't buy a big nice van that, you know, with ramps and all kinds of stuff. So these sort of expenses, I believe housing.
Yeah, I think housing, I think personal care assistance. So, you know, if you have staff or, you know, home people to come into your home to provide some assistance on a daily basis.
Yeah, so lots of different types of expenses that can be paid with these sort of things. So it's a pretty good deal. Now, the last similar piece of legislation, similar to the ABLE Act, was way back in 1995. In 1995, as part of the Omnibus Reconciliation Act of 1995, back when Bill Clinton was president, they passed a law. That law back then allowed something called a special needs trust to be created. Special needs trusts were ways that a disabled person could have a trust set up where, very similar, it could hold assets without affecting their eligibility for these benefits. But it was not a tax-free account. So unlike the ABLE Act, which is a tax-free account, and those special needs trusts had to be created by a court or a parent. And unfortunately, sometimes disabled people don't have either one. They don't have a parent, and going to court's expensive.
Right.
So those were not good options, whereas the ABLE account can be created by themselves. But the most important thing about the special needs trusts, if a person created it for their own benefit, when they died, just like the ABLE account, any money left over had to go back to the state. But if that special needs trust is created by one person for somebody else, so for example, if I create it for the benefit of my child, I don't have to put that payback provision in there. I can leave that part out. So these ABLE accounts are great in the sense that I can take, if I'm disabled, I can save some of my own money for my own benefit. But they're not great if what you're looking at doing is planning for a disabled child or niece or nephew or somebody else.
Right. So essentially, John, in what you're talking about is if a parent has, you know, for instance, a large life insurance policy or a large retirement account, and at their death they want to provide that to their disabled child for their use, you know, an ABLE account is not the right vehicle.
Right, it is not the right tool. Something like a special needs trust is going to be much more appropriate for things like inheritances or lifetime gifts by other people, because you're not limited to the amount that you can put in them. You don't have to pay back the state at death. So you know, if somebody's saving with their own funds, disabled person saving for themselves, ABLE account.
Sure.
Great plan. Somebody is saving for another person who happens to be disabled, then using a special needs trust is going to be a lot better tool with a lot more flexibility and without having to worry about those funds going back to the state in the end.
Right, and also, if you use a special needs trust at the death of that disabled person, if there's any money left in the trust, then those monies can be dispersed to other beneficiaries and heirs. So that's another tool.
So you can, whether it's to the disabled person's beneficiaries, but if they don't have any, it could be to their brothers and sisters and all different kinds of things. So special needs trusts are great tools. If you're looking at this sort of thing in the new year with these new accounts, just be aware that they are good tools for certain circumstances. Yeah. But that doesn't mean they're the good tool for every circumstance. And the problem I see is that these things are going to be promoted by financial advisors and such, who will be the ones
as the magic bullet.
As the magic bullet.
Yeah.
And there is no magic bullet in any of this. Yeah. That is the one thing we can assure you of. So hope you enjoyed the program on these ABLE accounts, and if that's something that you need more information about, that's what Aging Insight's here to do, is provide you that kind of information. Of course, if you've got specific questions and you need an answer, you can always call in to our live radio show, and that's Aging Insight Radio on 98.5, and you can call in there and get some answers, or you can even pick up a copy of the Aging Insight magazine, which has articles about special needs trusts. But until then, we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Aging Insight program with John Ross and Lisa Schollmeyer. This program is made possible by